Welcome, everyone. We are so glad that you are here, and I am really excited to introduce our very special guest today, Lisa Bonnice. Lisa is an award winning author, former stand up comedian, and program host with the Shift Network. Lisa also co created Generations Oracle Kit with Carrie Paris. Her newest book, Castlegate, was written using extensive genealogy research and communication with, air quotes, the other side. Welcome, Lisa. Really nice to have you here.
Thanks, Scott. I am really looking forward to our conversation, wherever it leads, because you and I always go down these interesting rabbit holes that we never really planned. So let's see where this goes.
We do have that problem, and it's wonderful. So, you were telling me before we went on the air that this is something that is a passion for you and that is something that you live. So, how did this get started? And what's this line of exploration we're going to be talking about today?
All right. Well, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to keep it as contained as much as I can. I got to this sort of by accident. I never really thought of myself as having mediumship skills or anything like that. But now that I look back on my life in hindsight, I can see that I was being called from the other side into the work that I ended up doing, both at the Shift Network and in my writing career. And it seems to have started when I began doing genealogy research, although it was probably part of the big picture all along, the whole free life plan, et cetera. But the more I dug into my family's history and got pulled into this remarkable story of this massive coal mine disaster that my ancestors experienced about 100 years ago. It'll be 100 years in 2024. The more I explored this, the more I saw synchronicities happening, and the more I realized that I was being met halfway by my ancestors, that they wanted me to tell their story. And one of those synchronicities was that I was researching for a different novel than the one I'm publishing this year, Castlegate, where one of the characters was taking a class in shamanic journeying. And this was before I began working with the Shift Network. And I wanted to make sure that I was portraying shamanism accurately. So I Googled Sandra Ingerman, who's a global expert in that field and whose books I'd read. And I found that Sandra was teaching classes at Shift. And when I dug in further, I discovered that Shift was hiring people with my exact skill set. So, long story short, I began working with Shift. And eventually, this led me to having a conversation with Sandra where she was talking about the symptoms of being cursed, which is a whole nother session. But I realized that I had all the symptoms, even though I thought the idea of a curse was whatever. But, you pay attention when someone like Sandra Ingerman's talking. So she and I had some interesting conversations, and I was eventually led back to my genealogy research, where I found a documented curse in my family tree from Scotland in the 1600s, which led me down the branches to discover that the family who was killed in the mine explosion were descended from that supposedly cursed lineage. And this is what blew my mind apart and started me into researching ancestral healing, which led to my newfound ability to, well, not so newfound ability to communicate with some of my ancestors because they were dropping a trail of breadcrumbs so I could learn their story. And as a writer, turn it into a series of novels, the first of which is coming out later this year, titled Castlegate, named after the coal mining town in Utah where it happened. And that's how it all started.
So, you're talking about this, go back to this curse thing. That is so interesting. What was it? Do you know any of the stories about that from way back when?
I'll give you the nutshell version. This was in, again, the 1600s, where one of my ancestors was a Presbyterian Covenanter. And so he was what he thought of as a godly man. He was landed gentry. He was knighted by the king. So he was actually called on as a judge in witchcraft trials. And he considered himself to be very fair. He wasn't going to just convict anybody. So it sounds like he was a pretty good guy overall. But he ended up falling very ill. and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. And again, this is the mid 1600s, so they didn't have the same kind of doctor and we have today, so they didn't know what was wrong. And a servant girl came forward and accused a local family of casting spells on him, casting witchcraft. And she brought his guards to the house of these people and said, there's a doll behind that chimney, I'll show you. And she walked in and she reached behind the chimney and pulled out a doll with pins in it. And so 5 people were arrested, long story, but they were tried, convicted, and executed, cursed by fire. They were executed by fire, burned to death. And it was documented that one of these people cursed this family to suffer as they suffered, to burn as they burn, etc. So when I saw this, and then again, I found, 100 years ago, my family members died by fire in a mine explosion. And then if you fast forward to my current family, the people that I actually knew, there were a number of people who either died by fire or were horribly injured by fire, had their houses burned down. Fire is a recurring theme. So you can't ignore that. You just can't. So as a writer and an obsessive compulsive genealogy researcher, I really dug in. And this also began my interest in ancestral healing, about finding, the patterns, the dysfunction, the generational trauma, et cetera. So it's all one big lump of a story that has so many facets. But anyway, that's the basic story of the curse.
Wow, that is so interesting. And I'm going, coal. What do they use coal for? To burn. And I was like, oh my word, synchronicities, like you were saying, they just keep showing up. So what is ancestral healing, and how does that work in the scheme of things that you're trying to do?
Okay, specifically with this story, I started again picking up these little breadcrumbs where my mom specifically, she ended up getting cancer and had it was lung cancer. Her lungs were burned up, and she ended up having radiation on her brain. Once she went into remission from the lung cancer, they wanted to prevent it from spreading to her brain, so they fried her brain. They burned her brain with radiation, and she was never the same. She ended up, dying of dementia. If she was still alive, she'd be furious at me for telling these personal stories, but she has come through from the other side numerous times, letting me know that it's okay for me to tell these stories now. I don't have to keep the family secrets. She's behind me 100% on this one. So she was also very claustrophobic with no reason. It's not like she was ever locked in a closet as a child or anything like that, but her father worked in coal mines. Her grandparents, the whole family lineage, for as far back as I could find on Ancestry, were coal miners, and being underground, that's a very claustrophobic thing. And that's where they were when they were killed. They were trapped underground. So that's what started me thinking, okay, maybe there is this kind of weird trauma being passed down. The fires were interesting. There's her father, as a result of, he wasn't in the mine that day, but his father was. His mother died a few months before that, and they had just come over from Scotland. So her father was now an orphan in a new country, and this apparently just broke his mind, where he ended up being a very damaged individual. So he was not a very good father, which passed down to my mother. She had to deal with the wound of abandonment by her father. And so these are sort of the milder versions of ancestral healing that go beyond the big explosions and curses. Abandonment by your father, that type of thing. It can cause personality defects that get passed on to your children. And so once you discover what the stories are, it's a lot easier to have a quicker, easier healing of them than, going through therapy and trying to figure out, well, how did this happen? I don't know. Looking into your family stories really does help you to discover, what are my issues. And again, I discovered that once I started looking into this, they were there on the other side. They were communicating with me because they wanted this to be healed. They wanted this to be discovered. And in addition, they just wanted their story told. They were really kind of excited about the idea of having a book written about them.
So, what's the mechanism for the healing part? I get where the wounds are passed down through generations, but how do we break that? And what's that look like?
Well, some of it had to do with just acknowledging that it was there, just realizing sometimes that was all it really took was oh, I get it now. And then, it's just like a flash. Your perspective on the other person's behavior and the way they treated you just sort of instantly shifts and dissolves. At least in my experience, it has dissolved, resentments and triggery thoughts, that type of thing. But then the big picture, when we're talking about the curse and the coal mine explosion, et cetera, I actually traveled to the locations. I went to Castlegate, Utah, and I visited where this all happened. And I spoke with people who lived there and the experts, and I interviewed a lot of people. I've been there a few times. I went to the cemetery, and my daughter and I went there, and we pray. She's a prayer warrior. She's big into prayer for healing, and prayed over the graves of, there was 173 men who died in this mine explosion, which was right below the cemetery. The cemetery is built on the ground above the mine, so this whole place is just rippling with traumatic energy. So as she was praying over the cemetery, that's when I was starting to go, okay, well, I'm starting to get some visionary kind of thing, and I was seeing this sort of fog rising up from the ground where the men who were trapped in what they thought was hell, or whatever. I'm not trying to put words in other ghosts' mouths, but from my ancestors' perspective, a couple of them felt they were trapped in hell. And so they were raised up from the ground. And as they were raised and ascended into what they considered to be heaven, because that was what they were taught, it really lightened things up. And when I got home, I noticed that my mom was a little better. I mean, it didn't heal her by any stretch, but she was a little better, and things seemed to move more smoothly with her. I also went to Scotland and visited the site of the executions, and did some apology prayers, that type of thing, to help lighten that load from the people who were unjustly accused and executed. So by doing this kind of work, I personally have noticed that my physical health has improved, my mental health, my emotional health, all the way around. I just feel lighter, healthier, more energetic. Um, Health issues that I used to have are clearing themselves up, or ones that can't clear themselves up. I'm finally finding doctors who can help work with them. So it's multifaceted. There's a lot to it. It's kind of hard to describe in just a little casual conversation, but I hope I'm delivering the gist of it.
So it's if I can kind of tidy that a little, it's about acknowledgement that we have this thing that's been passed down, and then we look at it and add some, I'm going to call it light energy to that particular. It's a person, or it's a place, or it's an event or something, and um, the very fact of doing that can help change the vibration around that particular event. Am I doing summarizing that okay?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, if I can refer to the conversation that you and I had within this same summit, where you were talking about how when you're having a life review, you're able to see different choices that you can make that will change your future, changes your perspective. It's very similar to that. It's just done in the physical world. And the thing that makes it harder in the physical world is you have to, well, I don't want to say you have to. I had to dig for it. I had to really want to know the answers to this. It didn't just come because, tra la la, the information fell in my lap. I had to work for it. I had to ask for it. Whereas what we were talking about earlier about how on the other side of the veil, it's a lot easier because it's shown to you and you're able to see from, this vantage point, this wide perspective, all of the possibilities. So it's the physical world's version of that, if that makes sense.
Yes, it absolutely does. So, your ancestors that are on the other side, what kind of help were they in this adventure?
Okay, where do I begin? Uh, they they would lead me to new information as I was trying to learn what exactly happened. As I mentioned, genealogy it's an obsession of mine. It has been for many years. And I would find information that wasn't there yesterday, and I realized some of it's algorithms and all that. But the fact is, I happened to find these bits of information that I had been looking for. Here's a great story. I was doing research into my great grandmother's younger brother. His name was Buchan. He was killed in World War I. And my great grandma Helen, who died in Castlegate, she was on his records as the next of kin. This is when they were still in Scotland. And one day I received a message on ancestry.com from a stranger asking about Buchan because my family tree has far more information on him than anyone else because I am so obsessive about this. And this woman told me that many years ago, she and her husband were building their new house in Tacoma, Washington, of all places, and found something buried in the dirt when they broke ground. And she kept it in a box all these years until technology advanced enough for her to finally do some research and identify who it should belong to. And it was a British memorial plaque with the name Buchan Littlejohn embossed on it. And there were two Buchan Littlejohns killed in World War I, and it turns out that they were cousins, and I knew about them, but we wanted to find out if this memorial plaque belonged to my family's Buchan. So because of, genealogy research and breadcrumbs being dropped, I discovered through a long series of events that Buchan's next of kin, my great-grandmother Helen, was awarded with this next of kin memorial plaque by King George. And she brought it from Scotland to Utah. And after she died, it ended up in her older brother's hands, and then ended up in his daughter's hands. And the daughter ended up moving to Tacoma, Washington. And I was able to track down how it got there because of genealogy research. That this Littlejohn woman was married, and her married name was on the land deed. But because I knew that she had married blah, 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 I was able to place the fact that this was literally the last person who held Buchan Littlejohn's memorial plaque. And the woman mailed it to me, and I've got it right here. So
Oh my.
What I discovered when, again, this is the mediumship, the psychic stuff, if you can look and see, you see his name, Buchan Littlejohn, is embossed there. And the very first time I held this in my hands, I ran my fingers across his name. And I knew, right, I'm feeling it right now, that Helen would do this. She would run her fingers across her little brother's names, and just think about him. And so when I do that, it's like this portal just opens wide, and she and I are connected. And so she would tell me when I was writing the book, this is another fun story. One of the ways that I was trying to develop the characters, because I didn't know these people, they were, dead long before I was even conceived. I wanted to get their personalities right. So I ran astrology reports just to give me something to work on. And because Scottish records have the time of birth, they can be very accurate. But when I ran these reports originally, I did not know that. And so I used the information on Helen's tombstone as her birth date. And so I ran this report. Fast forward, I was working on the book, and I was on this scene trying to figure out how would Helen react? How would her personality react? So I picked up this report and I started reading it, and I kept hearing this voice saying, "This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong." And this voice would not let me continue. So I went to my computer and I looked on Scotland's People.gov and found her actual birth record. And her birth date was wrong. It was the date and the year were both off. So this report I held in my hand was wrong. And then once I ran a new report, I got her personality, and her character was then written as a result of having the correct information. And I wasn't making up that this is wrong because I didn't know it was wrong. So there's
Yeah.
Fun story.
So I want to switch gears a little bit on us, because you have written about the big awakening that we're in right now. And what is this big awakening, and where are we going?
Well, I feel like that's just my way of wording the fact that things are weird right now. Things are very strange. Nobody can deny that. And I feel like we're at a tipping point. Humanity can go in either direction. We can either blow each other up and melt the planet, or we can get our collective act together and heal the mess that has been created over the millennia from the actions of all of our ancestors. And again, I feel like they're on our side, cheering us on, dropping ideas and answers to those of us who are asking for them. But we have to ask. And from everything I've learned on the topic through, working with Shift and interviewing people for the summits and taking Shift classes, et cetera, they can't interfere unless they're invited. At least on this side of the veil, they're not. So I'm inviting them. I say, make me a useful tool in the healing of this big mess. Tell me your stories so I can share them and help others to realize that they have their own stories and they have their own work to do. So they're showing up, those from the other side. And it's not just me with my little, version of it with my genealogy. It's becoming, well, I mean, your work, it's 50 years ago, it wouldn't have existed. 100 years ago, oh my God, no. But we're all many of us are tapping into this collective consciousness where we're realizing there's so much more to this, and they're showing us how to connect with something bigger than ourselves, our limited view of the physical world, how to walk with one foot in both worlds so we can make better choices because we can see what we're doing from a more lofty perspective. And again, that's what your work is about, is opening yourself up and rising above the physical body to be able to access more loving, compassionate, powerful information. And so, that's what I'm personally calling the Great Awakening, because so many of us are starting to get involved. And really, it's time. We don't have any time to waste.
We don't. And I really appreciate what you were saying about we have to ask. Yes, we agree on that. And we have to ask creatively. And my perspective is, so we're working on this thing, on a problem or whatever. And what I've discovered is that when we ask for our ancestors or our guides or whomever comes through, it really makes a difference that we ask through different lenses at the same thing, because we have a limited vocabulary. That's a real problem, English. And we have a limited imagination because we're in a box. And it's helpful to be able to have them blow open our box and give us solutions that we might not have thought of. How am I doing?
Absolutely, we are totally on the same page. It's to me, it's a little frustrating that we have to ask, but it is what it is. I mean, otherwise they'd be meddling with everything. Well, let me do that. Like when my kids were little, my daughter would want to wash the dishes, and I'd be like, just let me finish. Just, instead of letting her learn how to do dishes and how to rinse them and make sure you get all the stuff off, I would be impatient and get in there and do it for her. And that's not what they do. They won't come in and wash your dishes for you. You have to learn how to do it yourself. So if you want help, you have to ask specifically for what you want. And I agree that you have to ask from these different perspectives and angles, because if you're asking from your human personality, which is informed by the traumas, the misinformations, the misperceptions you might have about people's personalities and why they did what they did and why you took it the way you did. So yeah, the learning to ask it in a clear and concise manner is really, yeah, I think that's key.
So where do you think this awakening is going to go? What are you working on?
Where I hope it's going, because oh my God, the way the things are going right now, I mean, it's getting to the point where I can't even watch the news because it's just so it's overwhelming what's happening out there in the physical world. So I think that, I mean, while we need to stay informed, we need to know what's happening. We also need to make sure that we're keeping our own, our own vibe high and in touch with our hearts, in touch with our higher selves. It's that using the English words again, where the way that I describe it might not be the way somebody else would, but basically being your own best self helps to expand your energy body, and by the way, that helps heal your physical body while you're at it. But the more of us who do this, I feel that the more of us who do this expansive work and really light ourselves up, the more we can sort of tip the consciousness. We tip the scale. We overpower the ickies. We sort of just we win by default just because there's more of us.
So that's a technical term, right? The ickies.
Yes, yes, yes. I read that in college. Yes.
Yeah. So in terms of having them help us and us doing our part, what are your favorite tools for communication?
Again, this is one of the good things about working with Shift over the years, because I've had access to some of the most interesting and profound thinkers and experts. And along the way, I have picked up some very useful tools and toys. And first, I should mention again your work, sound meditations, etc. Suzanne Giesemann, Eben Alexander, the binaural beats. That's a really powerful tool that people like me don't personally have to try to there's somebody helping you to raise your consciousness. So those are really very, very helpful. There's also Tina Zion does this practice where you ramp up what she calls your toroidal field, and you can Google search Tina Zion toroidal field. There's a file on YouTube. Suzanne Giesemann has what she calls the Bless Me method. Again, you can search for that. These are basically methods to help you set aside your human gunk, the ickies, and to connect with your true inner self. And Sandra Ingerman, of course, she's got something she calls transfiguration, which is interesting. This is what I called shape-shifting in my very first book 1,000 years ago, without even realizing I was tapping into something so profound that even Sandra Ingerman teaches it. It's basically where you connect with the inner light pillar within yourself, the purest isness that is you, that is so pure that it's not even really part of your physical self, because your physical self is I guess sort of a translation of the thoughts and the misinformation and all that sort of solidified. So when you can tap into this inner isness and expand it and spread it and just move it outwards like this, and you just become you're doing it from the inside out instead of asking for help bringing it from the outside in. You're already as healed and as good and as solid as you can be within you. The hard part is knowing that and tapping into it. So those are some of my favorite tools for tapping in. But one of my favorite actual tools is Carrie Paris has an oracle deck called the Beloved Dead, and it's magnificent. I started using this a while ago, and it's an oracle deck, but it's pictures, it's old family photos that she collected from people, and I would sometimes hear, you got to call we're trying to call you. And I would pull out the deck and I would shuffle it. And the first card that I invariably pulled was this one, the communication card, a woman making a phone call. And that, when I would pull this card as the first one, it happened so often that it almost became silly. I mean, I would shuffle even more so that I wouldn't accidentally pull this card. And that's the one that would come up. And another one that comes up, another story that I love, I was in Castlegate visiting the cemetery. And because these are my Scottish ancestors, I cleaned up their graves and I toasted them each with some whiskey. I brought a little bit of whiskey with me and I took a sip and I splashed some on each grave. And then when I got home back here to Arizona, I picked up my Oracle deck and I just wanted to sort of check in. Hi guys, I was just there, how's everything going? And this was the first card that I pulled. A bartender holding up a glass in toast. So you can't deny this kind of stuff. It's that's another one of my favorite tools. I really love that's Carrie Paris's Beloved Dead Oracle deck.
Well, I love how you can take these tools and turn them into something that is yours. I just happen to think I've known Suzanne Giesman for a long time and have taken some of her classes, and I worked with her on the Bless Me method that she uses, and I turned it using Tai Chi moves. So each one of those has its own movement and energy that's associated with that. And it's been really powerful for me. I tend to get things kinesthetically. So having that available, that tool available, but have it work for me makes all the difference in the world. Like you were just saying, you've got these tools you picked up from other people in the Shift network. And so how has this all of these tools, this communication with the other side, healing generational stuff, has it actually helped you? Or are you just messing around?
Yeah, at first I was just messing around just because I'm really interested in it and I might as well be doing this as opposed to, watching yet another series on Netflix. So, yes, at first I was just doing it because it was interesting, but it really has been life-changing. And I don't mean that as a cliche. It has truly changed my life. As I mentioned earlier, my health has genuinely improved. This is a little personal, but the people like hearing this kind of stuff. I had a lot of problems with my female internal stuff, and my mother did, and my grandmother did, and apparently her mother did. So this was something along the female line of my family, and by doing this ancestral work and tuning into what had happened to these women, it felt as if something horrible, it felt like there was war crimes committed against at least one of my grandmothers, and that it was, things had been damaged energetically, et cetera, and it was just passed down through the females in this line. And by doing this work, I have seen a marked improvement in that. Also, mentally, emotionally, I'm much calmer. Life isn't as hard as it used to be. It used to be such a struggle where getting up every day was a chore that I only bothered to do because I was still on this side of the dirt. And that's one of the symptoms of the curse that I was talking about earlier. But now that I've looked into the curse, that karmic debt that has stained one of the branches of my family tree, I've been happy to make amends. As I mentioned, I traveled to Scotland to explore where it all began, visited Castle Gate. I've toasted them with whiskey. We've released the dead from what they considered to be hell, and it released me from my hell. It was it's been very powerful work, and I don't really tell many people about it other than the Shift Network type of audience, because your average Joe is going to think, oh, whatever. But And I used to let that bother me, okay, fine, I won't do it. No, not whatever. This is real. This works for me. My life is better. And it's an amazing story. And because I'm a writer, I'm writing about it. And yeah, it's absolutely been life-changing.
So, Lisa, it strikes me that your work is akin to soul retrieval. Um, Only I'm not certain that the souls are lost on the other side. It's just that they're carrying an energetic signature that they don't need to anymore, and that we can heal that. How am I doing on that?
Yeah, I think you're onto something. I personally wouldn't use the phrase soul retrieval just because I have tremendous respect for people who do that work, and I'm not trained in that work, but I do see that it's a similar thing but as opposed to bringing something home, something that's been disconnected and brought home, I feel like in my work anyway, I'm removing things that are separating, that are blocking, that are in the way. So it's not like something's been taken. I've had soul retrievals done, so I know that parts of you can be snatched away and hidden and all that. So this is more that you're disconnected from it just through these energy blockages. I mean, I feel when I'm talking about this curse specifically, it almost feels like right in this part of my field, there's this sort of big gray blob. And by doing this work, by dissolving this blob, by lifting this stain, a stain is more the way that I'm looking at it. By removing the stain, lightening it up, changing the color, etc., it just gets filled in naturally by what should have been there all along. So yeah, I think it's a similar process. I think it's a really good comparison, but not a phrase that I would use lightly.
Got it. Um, so when you have, say you're working with this grandmother energy, and do you have the capability to tag your grandmother, go to your grandmother and work with her directly? And how do you do that, if that's true?
I have, hmm, I wish I could say I could just do it like that. But it doesn't always work that way specifically. I think sometimes it's on my end that I'm just not tuned in right. Maybe I've got other stuff on my mind, like, oh, I need to do this over here, but I'd rather be doing over here, rather be talking with Helen. But I have learned to recognize her energy when in fact, I just felt her pop in right now. When I need her to help me, figure out the story, that's where the "this is wrong" voice came in. There's other times when I was, working on the book where I was wondering, well, how would Helen do this? And then poof, an image of a story that would never have occurred to me would pop into mind. And I realized that, that's part of being a writer is, using your imagination. But I believe that since I'm asking this specific being for help, and that's the information I'm being given, then I'm going to trust that that's her. In fact, let me tell you another story about Helen. I have photos of every one of my great grandparents except for Helen. And this has been driving me crazy for years. And I mean, even when I went to Scotland, I deliberately went to a couple different places where she lived and looked at the historical society's photo albums to see, can I find a picture of her? I went around the world to find a picture of this woman, and it wasn't coming. And I've been just badgering relatives, come on, look in your boxes. And it never happened until finally, just this last month in August, a friend of mine who had been helping me with the book, because she lived in Castlegate and she knows a lot of the local history. She just died suddenly. And the day that she died, I got a message from a family member with, it's show and tell day, with this picture. That's Helen right there. For the
Oh,
very first time, I got a picture of my great grandmother Helen. And I realized because she kind of let me know, I thought maybe one of the reasons I wasn't getting a picture of her was because maybe she didn't like her. I mean, I'm not photogenic. I think I look horrible in pictures. So maybe she just didn't like the picture she was in. But I realized seeing this, she was maybe 14 in this picture. She's very young. And if I had seen this photo before I started writing the book, it would have colored the way that I saw her. I would have seen her as a little girl. I wouldn't have seen her as a 38-year-old woman. So I wasn't able to see the photo of her until after the book was done, put to bed, her character was finished, and now I can see what she looked like. And I just thought it was really interesting that it happened the day that my friend died. Suddenly I get a photo of Helen.
I love that story. And who's in the photo with her?
I'm pretty sure that's her brother John. And because I have pictures of him as an adult, and he looks very, very similar to this. Plus, I believe that this photo was probably taken, like I said, she looks like she's about 14 years old, and that's the age when her mother died. And look what they're wearing. She's wearing a dress that doesn't necessarily fit her very well. And because of her age, she wouldn't be wearing, this is an older woman's dress. So I think maybe she's wearing funeral garb. I'm guessing again, but because her mom did die around this time, and this is about the time that you'd be taking photos, that's what I'm guessing. And she hasn't corrected me on that. So those are my guesses on this photo specifically, that it's her and her older brother, John, who lived in Castlegate as well.
So, Lisa, we're kind of bumping up here against our time limit, but we have covered all different kinds of topics. Is there anything that I've forgotten that you want to be sure to emphasize?
We've actually covered more than I expected, so thanks for pulling that out of me. I think basically the most important thing here is, one of the most important things that I've learned doing this is that never mind what other people are saying. There are going to be people saying you're just full of it. I mean, I've had to try to tell my family, these stories, and the idea of coming out with a book series about, a curse in our family tree. I know some of my family's going to go, oh God, it's Lisa. But you can't let that stop you. If it feels true, and if it's healing to you, if it's genuinely helping, you're not deluding yourself. I'm very, very cautious about, going down, crazy rabbit holes. I want to make sure that I'm grounded in reality, etc. But you can be grounded in reality and also be open to, the other realms. I think it's pretty important that you are both grounded and open to the realms.
Same metaphor, a foot in both worlds. We can be here and we can be listening to that voice from Grandma Helen.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. So, Lisa, how can people find out more about you and the kind of work that you do?
Well, I've got a website, lisabonnice.com. I've also got a website for the book, castlegatebook.com. You got to add the word book because castlegate.com was already taken, and it's a tool company or something. So that's not the right one. It's castlegatebook.com. And the book will be out in November. And book 2, where we talk about the curse itself, the witch trial, which is an amazing story in itself. And then book 3 will be the resolution, the sort of a fictionalized version of how these stories all pull together and everything's good again.
And everything's going to be all right.
Yes.
Lisa, thank you. What a wonderful, interesting conversation we have. We always have. So thank you for being with us today. And all of you who are viewing this, thank you for attending. And we wish you the best.